Bradley from the Out Loud group will give you 10 minutes of great content. Bradley, take it away.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I heard a lot of chatter about influencer today, and I'm excited to share a little bit of information with you guys since this is the world I am living and breathing every single day. We'll go ahead and get started because I know we only have 10 minutes anyways. So let's start with a definition of what is influencer marketing. Well, at the end of the day, influencer marketing is word of mouth marketing at scale. So when you hear your friend recommend a fantastic new restaurant, you're likely to go to that new restaurant. And the reason you're likely to go to that new restaurant is because you trust your friend. And influencers work because their audience trusts influencers. And it's the same reason that you wouldn't actually take up a recommendation from someone you randomly heard on the subway because you don't have that trust. So it's really, really important to understand the art and the science of influencer, and some of it cannot be quantified. As much as all of us love numbers and data and analytics, you can't always quantify things when it comes to influencer. But let's take a step back and look at some of the metrics here in terms of where the industry is today. We all know a lot of the mega trends, right? Is that people are cutting the cord to cable. Traditional media dollars are shifting into digital. But there's some challenges with that as well, and that is ad blockers. 40% of people now online are using ad blockers, so it's harder and harder to reach those individuals. We know video is king. Content is going nowhere. Despite the fact that traditional TV is challenged, video is still very healthy. We see 5 billion views on YouTube every single day. And so for us, we're big believers in trying to fish where the fish are. So maybe we should first pause for a second and just appreciate this mustache that's here. This is Rob Turkla from Lunkers TV. We'll chat about him in a little bit. But none of us like to be sold to, but especially millennials. Millennials hate being sold to, but people like to hear about interesting things from that cool older cousin. And really that's what influencer marketing mimics, is that cool older cousin who has the right to be able to sell to their audience. In fact, people want to hear from influencers. People trust influencers much more so than they trust brands, even when they know the influencer is being paid by the brand. Okay, so there's one really important factor when it comes to nailing influencer marketing. It's understanding brand advocacy versus brand voice. So brand voice, for many of you, is like a warm puppy dog on a blanket on top of a bed. It's really, really comfortable. You've spent a lot of time, energy, and effort developing the tone for your brand, the cadence, the pacing, the level of staccato, if that's even a thing, right? And there's good reason why you've done that, because it works. You know how to communicate your brand to your audience effectively. And that's fantastic. But that's a very, very different approach than what works with influencers. But you're all here. Your desire is to grow as individuals. Your desire is to grow your brand. And you're willing to take on some of that discomfort, which is fantastic, because when you let go of the brand voice and transition to brand advocacy, really good things can happen. So again, this is Rob Turkla. He's a former Army sniper. He has Lunkers TV. It's a mid-sized YouTube channel. It's got about 1.2 million subs. Instagram is about 500K. And his wife's father, unfortunately, recently passed away. This is something that his audience knows, they care about. And so he was thinking, what is it that I can do to try to help my mother-in-law feel safer? So through a partnership with SimpliSafe, he went over to his mother-in-law's house and installed a home security company. And this is someone who obviously knows a little bit about security as a former Army sniper, right? And so he installed this and shared this with his audience, said, this is how I keep my family safe. And he didn't use the brand terms that SimpliSafe typically would. He didn't use their particular brand voice. He said it in a way that connects with his audience. It was wildly successful, sold a ton of units, and SimpliSafe now has a long-term partnership with Rob. So there's a lot of goodness when you can let go as a brand and allow the influencer to tell a story using their own voice. So storytelling we've heard a lot about today as well. Influencers are fantastic storytellers. So I want to compare and contrast a couple brands and how they've chosen to tell stories. So we're going to first take a look at VW, and then we're going to take a look at Verizon. So Volkswagen recently set a record for the fastest time to get an electric-powered car up a Pikes Peak in Colorado. So a winding road, fantastic race, and it was powered by an electric car. But they didn't stop there. They worked first with Mark Rober, who's a large influencer. You can see he's got over 6 million subscribers. And they had Mark tell the story of how they powered the fuel cell for this electric car. So Mark grabbed thousands of lemons and harnessed the power of lemons in order to help to fill the fuel cell for this world record-setting time that Volkswagen had. And so this allowed the story of Volkswagen to be told in a very approachable way. And oh, by the way, it got nearly 7 million views. I want to compare and contrast that with Verizon, who had a fantastic story to tell with their Human Ability campaign. It literally talks about how their technology enables people to save lives. It's really, really great content. And they pushed this out through their own social media channel. And you can see here it got about 11,000 views. And that's fine, that's good, but they had to pay for the production, right? The production content and the cost, they obviously pushed that out to their social, and they could have chosen to amplify their social posts with paid media. They ultimately decided not to on this particular video. They did on some others, but there's a lot of cost that's behind that. And so you can see here are two different approaches. One has zero production costs, but requires you to pay the influencer and tap it into their audience. And the other is where you have to spend a lot of time, energy, and effort in terms of doing your own production. Both can be good in different situations, but we're big fans of influencers because even if these two are equal, go back to that stat I said earlier, which is that 92% of people trust what influencers say more than what brands say, because what a brand says becomes noise, like, oh, the brand has to say that you're trustworthy. The brand has to say that we take care of the data, right? The brand has to say our technology is really saving lives when you're working in a life or death scenario. Okay, so we've talked about a few of the good things about influencers. They hit a target market that can be tough to reach. They're authentic, they're fantastic storytellers. But there's one other element of influencers that I like to call the avocado effect. So influencers are like avocado in that when you bite into a sandwich with an avocado, it makes all the other flavors in that sandwich that much better, right? So like the tomato tastes really good, the bread is that much crisper when you have an avocado on it. And what we've seen through a number of brand studies is that when you run a meaningful influencer campaign, you actually are going to decrease your paid social acquisition, right? And your paid search acquisition costs. And the reason for that is because you're putting trust out there into the world, and obviously just like TV advertising, you're getting impressions that are gonna sort of change the hearts and mind of your potential customers. Okay, so that is the good of influencer marketing. So I wanna get a little bit into the bad of influencer marketing. First and foremost, influencers are fantastic. They're creative geniuses, but an awful lot of them can be precious. They can be snowflakes. And regardless of what word you want to use to coin them, they are going to take up a shitload of time. And so there's a lot of back and forth. So some only respond over text. Some want to talk on the phone. Some never want to talk on the phone and only want to do things over email. Some want to correspond via Instagram direct messaging. It is very difficult to corral influencers, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of relationship building in order to be able to get to a point where you can run an effective influencer campaign. So many of you have 5 million things going on, and trying to run an influencer campaign on top of that takes a ton of time. So that's one big challenge that we see with influencers. Another challenge that maybe isn't so obvious is that it can be structurally challenging for brands to work with influencers. So here you see a recent match between Chelsea and Manchester City where the Chelsea coach and the goalkeeper had a little bit of a tiff where the coach was trying to call the goalkeeper off, and the goalkeeper actually refused to go off of the pitch. And it made me think that this sometimes can be emblematic of what can happen inside of marketing organizations, because you can have the branding part of the team and then the acquisition part, and I'm not even talking about the social and the PR and the comms, and they all have very different goals and metrics. So you think about branding, it's all about awareness and how do people think about us, versus acquisition, it's sales, 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 I need to see the numbers and the metrics. Well, guess what? Influencer sits right in the middle, and it's fantastic at doing both. We really like YouTube because of the storytelling element of YouTube that you just don't get in Instagram with a static post or even a shorter video. With YouTube, you get the true benefit of influencer. It's harder, but you get the true benefit through the storytelling, which is something that we really like. So you're getting these impressions and views, which the branding team likes, but then there is a clickable link, so it's very easy for the direct response team or the acquisition team to say, hey, how are we doing in terms of direct response? And the reality is that you're gonna have a positive impact on both, but the measurement and the attribution can be tricky because of structural barriers that exist at a lot of marketing organizations. So that can be a challenge as well. Also, there's just a lot of bullshit in the influencer world. So there's a couple folks up on this slide that you can see who have faked brand deals to try to enhance the credibility of their own channel. So the brands had nothing to do with this. There's a couple of influencers who are actually computer generated that are up here. They're not even human, but they have large, massive followings and sometimes decent engagement. There's also a lot of what we call Johnny-come-latelys. There's a lot of people who are saying they do influencer now. They don't necessarily have the relationships. They don't necessarily know where all the landmines are. And so they're out claiming to be influencers, so that can be challenging. Another tricky thing is a lot of PR agencies who are actually, venerable, do good work, but they see the market changing, right? They hear what we've heard today, influencer, influencer, influencer. So they now say they have an influencer line and offering as well, but a lot of times same thing as the new people, they don't have those relationships. So even if you're fantastic at traditional PR and you now have an influencer arm, that doesn't mean that you have the credibility amongst the influencer community that's so important to be effective. So there's a lot to suss out here when it comes to influencer. There's some things that you can do to try to minimize that. A lot of this goes to time, so that it does take a lot of time. You certainly can partner with an agency such as ourselves as well to try to do a lot of that heavy lifting for you as well. So moving on to the ugly of influencer marketing, and I think this is a pretty straightforward here. So there's stories with all of these that involve gambling and homophobia and infidelity and lack of sensitivity to life and death. That can happen, right? This absolutely can happen in influencer, but the reality is it can happen in any sort of partnership outside of influencer as well. Ask Nike and Accenture, who had the perfect partner in Tiger Woods until he was not perfect anymore. So there's risk, there's things that you can do to mitigate this as well. Definitely, we encourage folks to not go for the shock jocks. Do not try to partner with channels where the essence of the channel is to try to surprise and shock channels. That's generally speaking a bad idea. You want to work with influencers who have credibility in a particular domain area and who you can develop long-term partnerships with in order to be as successful as possible. So influencers, there's a lot of good that we talked about. There's plenty of challenges. They are, I'm a big believer in asking the question, is the juice worth the squeeze? For influencers, we absolutely believe yes, but there's not a one-size-fits-all way to work with influencers. You need to decide for yourself, do we want to try to take this on ourselves? Do we have the bandwidth, the time, the energy, and the patience to do that? Do we want to try to use an automated platform, which can be really good in terms of discovery and can be really good for working with some of the smaller channels? Or do we want to work with an agency, someone who can really help us to be able to scale this program, vet it, be as safe as possible, and provide that strategic leadership in terms of the why. So appreciate you guys spending a few minutes with me today. I don't think we have time for questions, correct? But I will be around, and feel free to grab me for the rest of the day. Thanks,
Let's give it up for Brad from the Out Loud group.